So we talked through and said, and then we talked a little about Prince Edward County, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on because you'll hear about it a bunch, and there's a lot of, and I said I have talked about it some. But one of the key things was really understanding, right, presenting it in a way of understanding that what had happened was really understanding the shift in focus from, gee, can we just get tourists, to, in fact, the same things that attract tourists can also attract residents. And so I also did some work in Aberdeen, North or South Dakota, I forget which one, not Scotland, and in Aberdeen in the Dakotas. And they get tons and tons of tourists through every year who come in to hunt, specifically grouse and pheasant and stuff. So it's I think they said something like 40,000 people will go through actually go through the airport every year. Almost all of them are coming there to hunt. They go to lodges, they go out, they go grouse hunting, they have a great time, they go home. And they said, this is terrible. So we love the fact that we got all these people coming through, but really we ought to be able to do something with it. So they started a campaign. And every lodge, hotel, at the airports, at all the restaurants, they put out just these little cards, little postcards, little mail return cards that said, you know what, you love coming here to vacation and to do other things. Wouldn't you like to move your business to Aberdeen? And then people sent those cards in, right? They filled them out and sent them in. And then they actually, in the first year they did it, they had over 1,500 cards submitted, which they then took the people said, well, what kind of job do you have? And it's a lot of, it's doctors and lawyers and bankers and all kinds of other people. And they would have somebody in the community working in those same kinds of jobs contact them and say, hey, let me talk to you about Aberdeen. Let me tell you why it's great to live here, why you want to move your family here. And they actually did end up, I know of the 1,500, they actually did end up with at least 10 to 15 last time I heard. It's been a year or two now. People that actually did move their businesses, right? I mean, these are higher wealth individuals who are coming there. And it was the same idea, though, saying we have this tourist asset, and how do we turn it into something else, and how do we help it grow, especially trying to grow a creative class. And so I said, so in PEC, it's the same kind of story, right? There's a lot of really great things. People are going there for visits, going for other things. And also, as you're building up those assets, as you're building up the tourist economy, those amenities, as they get more local food restaurants, as they get more fabulous dairies and more things happening with the winery, it's actually snowballing, right? Because now more people want to go there for tourist reasons, but that increases the base of people from which Dan can try to steal some more people away from Toronto to get them to move. So it builds on itself. So there also is you still get the tourist benefit, but it's also saying, make sure you're trying to kind of tap into that to really turn it into something for your advantage. So we talk more specifically in the paper about some very specific ways to kind of look at that and things that can be done and how those approaches also, there are other things that you can look at, not just tourism. Tourism is a good one, but there may be other things to try to figure out what you can leverage. The last thing is just what I always say for rural strategies. For those of you who saw my presentation that I gave at Monieson when I was here before, so I always say, right, there's 3 important strategies for kind of rural creative economy development that are incredibly important, and then the super secret 4th strategy. And so actually the 4th strategy got on the slide, so I didn't see these slides, so that's a problem, because the 4th strategy is not supposed to be there. But you have to look big, you have to think big, you have to use a shotgun and not a rifle. And looking big and thinking big, right, is looking big says, or think big is the first one here. It says you have to think more than just the one city or more, it's regionally. You have to think regionally about these things. Especially if you're trying to attract people, pull in assets, and build up, even for tourism, heritage, cultural assets, all these other things, you really do need to leverage as much as you possibly can. So the larger you can kind of cast your net, the more things you can tell people you have in your region. It's like, oh yeah, we have that, we have that, we have that. It might not all be in one town, it might be the next town and the next town and the next town. But as a region, you can actually have an awful lot more by actually simply thinking bigger. You have to look big to the outside so that when you are talking to people, you're saying, no, it's not just about Smith Falls, it's about a bigger place than that. It's more than that. And so the outside is understanding too. They're not necessarily thinking small town, they're thinking regionally as well, as they're understanding it and looking at the place as being a region. The shotgun and auto rifle, I don't want to sound so violent, but the key thing is that there are no silver bullets. Development, right, chasing smokestacks no longer works. Yes, you still need jobs and it's important, but you have to do 100 little things, which is why I say it's a shotgun. So, it's 100 shot up against the side of the barn that are all going to, you have to try 100 little things rather than one great big one. And it's those 100 little things, some will work, some won't. But you have to look at them and figure out which ones worked and how can you leverage them and how can you turn them into something more successful. Other than I always say, right, the key thing, and in the end, right, to really be successful at this stuff, the other thing that has to happen as a region is you have to be lucky. You have to have, but the other thing I always like to remind people, I said, right, chance favors the prepared mind. So it's not just being lucky, but it's also know that you've been lucky and knowing that how can you leverage that into something interesting, right? So I always loved it. What was it? I think it was like when Regis and Kelly came to Halifax, wasn't this, right? All of a sudden, it was like this thing got started where all of a sudden it was like, was it PEI, or PEI, right? Yeah, PEI. I mean, all of a sudden it was like this whole thing about Prince Edward Island and Regis and Kelly, and it was like this huge deal, right? It was an incredible piece of luck that ever happened, right? But how do you leverage that? And how do you turn it into, right? How do you make sure that you're actually using it to your best advantage? Which PEI tried to do. They played it up as much as they possibly could. But it is important sometimes to recognize that for a lot of this stuff, it's one of these where you end up being lucky, right? Something happens and you say, oh, wow, that's really cool. I want more of that, right? But you have to kind of be monitoring and aware and watching what's going on to know when that's happened. So anyway, so that's my 20 minutes. References which you don't care about. So.
Great. Let's ask questions related to the paper and related to the whole concept of the creative economy and the notion of creative class. Now, I know that notion is not always positively viewed, so let's just open up the floor to your questions.